She is one of the most celebrated names in global media, been associated with big ticket brands like Tatler, Vanity Fair, New Yorker, The Daily Beast. And now, of course, her current passion is the Women in the World Summit, which Tina Brown has brought to India for the very first time. It is my pleasure to welcome Tina on the Buck Stops here.
Wonderful.
And there is so much to talk to you about, and unfortunately so little time, that I've devised a little formula which I think will help us navigate all the things we want to talk about. So I'm going to give you one word, and I want you to answer with the one thing that comes in your head when you hear that word, and then we'll deep dive into it. So of course we have to start with, I think, what's got the world's attention. And my first word to you is Paris.
Burning. Paris is burning. And the story that I think is underplayed right now about Paris is the Saudi influence that has promulgated so much fanaticism in the Molenbeek area of Belgium where these attacks have happened. Because that is not Paris, but of course the Belgium was where the root of the attack was. And the Saudis have gone in there with these mosques. They went in there about 20 years ago, they opened all these mosques, and it's from there that this radicalism has spread.
I'm so glad you brought up Saudi Arabia because, you know, in India especially, there is a counter-narrative to the Western narrative, and that counter-narrative is the West is all in a froth over what's happened in Paris, and understandably so. But then why is there such a close alliance between the United States of America and Saudi Arabia? And what does this phrase war on terror mean if those kind of alliances continue? And I'm just wondering if domestic pressure is building up in the US, in the United Kingdom, in the West against Saudi Arabia, or does oil rule?
Well, I still think that oil rules in the public space, but I think there's a kind of boiling beginning about Saudi, because somehow the image of Obama and all of them showing up at that funeral of King Abdullah, when they're the ones who are exporting all this Wahhabi Islamic fanaticism, it's beginning to rankle in America now, and I think you're going to see this upsurge finally happening.
And you think policy towards Saudi Arabia could change?
It has to change.
You know, one of the things that Indians remarked on when President Obama was here, one of his speeches reinforced the need for India to uphold diversity, and no disagreement with that. But then he went from here to Saudi Arabia, and of course it didn't say very much there at all.
It said nothing, and actually it was obscene. I thought it was obscene. When I saw those photographs, I felt enraged, because they are to me they're one of the big culprits of the current miseries of our world.
Which part struck you as obscene?
What struck me as obscene was the sight of our president and all of the big cheeses in the world lining up for this funeral of King Abdullah, when, frankly, the policy with Saudi has been one of the biggest problems. It struck me as obscene.
So let me take you to the next word, the Islamic State.
Oh, a death cult. A death cult. And what really distresses me about it is the ease with which these 27, 26-year-olds are blowing themselves up. How desperate can you be? How absolutely toxic must your internal misery and disaffection be that you are willing to put on a suicide vest and blow yourself up? You know, when I read there was a young woman who blew herself up in the crackdown, the raid that happened just the other day, I asked myself who this young woman was and how it is that she could have wound up in that apartment with those terror merchants blowing herself up.
Why is it, you think, that in countries of Europe, compared to, let's say, a country like India, why are there so many more men and even women on occasion willing to fight with the Islamic State when these were meant to be classically, especially in the Western stereotype of India, the more modern societies? We don't have, at least so far, that kind of draw by the ISIS.
It is absolutely fascinating because there is so much hardship in India in terms of people who are totally disenfranchised. You would think that terrorism would take more of a hold here. But I think it is the juxtaposition of the affluence and the opportunities of the West and the absolute disaffection of the unassimilated immigrants that have poured in the last 25, 30 years, more and more and more, who have never felt really part of that society. And these second-generation immigrants are deeply, deeply alienated. And how alienated we didn't realize until now. But that is what makes it so sinister, because they're actually homegrown. And it is so hard to know what to do about that. How do you bomb your own suburbs?
Yeah, and one of the raging debates in India right now, and some of our politicians are actually in the headlines for all the wrong reasons because of this, because some of them have argued that it's not enough to say what happened in Paris was terrible, that the Islamic State is evil. There has to be a kind of understanding of the lack of integration in these societies that you speak of. But there are others who are saying there has to, this is not the time for ifs and buts, this is not the time for explanations, this is the time only for unequivocal condemnation. Which side of the debate do you weigh in on?
Well, what I see is that you cannot bomb this problem away. That is the problem. You cannot bomb the problem away. So we have to engage in the social issues that surround it.
Cannot bomb the problem away.
No, you cannot bomb the
So
problem away.
you don't think these airstrikes or a more militaristic response is what's needed right now?
Well, the problem is you've got to respond, because what you cannot do is just sit there and say, let's work out your social problems. But there has to be now a big global dialogue about what we're going to actually do, get our acts together and decide, for instance, who is the enemy. Like in Syria, one of the problems is everybody's arguing about really who is the enemy. I mean, the Russians consider, that Assad is their ally. And yet, Obama feels that unless Assad goes, we don't want to collaborate. So at the same time, you have to decide first who the enemy is, get our acts together, and then figure out what can we do about this alienation of this whole generation. It is just a problem that can't be solved simply by violence.
Obama's big legacy moment was, of course, a deal with Iran. But do you think he's completely misread the danger of the Islamic State? Just hours before this attack or a day before this attack, he said the Islamic State had been contained. And you've got Hillary now jumping into that argument and saying you can't contain the ISIS, you have to destroy it.
Well, I think he deeply underestimated. And actually, I have to say that I think that Obama did not pay enough attention when America came out of Iraq. Because it was like, America wanted to declare the war in Iraq is over, we're out of Iraq. Attention, please, you can just switch. That is a disaster, because by taking the attention away from what was going to happen after America came out of Iraq, it's created the ISIS state. I mean, it is America really that has tremendously contributed to the rise of ISIS, alas. And then not going into Syria when the line was drawn in the sand, who knows what would have happened. Yeah. And I am actually sympathetic with him in that regard. Everybody can say, well, if we'd just gone into Syria when we said we were going to, ISIS would not have got hold. We don't really know. The alternative could have been we were suddenly ensnared in another morass with Americans getting killed. So I don't envy his choices, but I have to say that I think neglect and American ADD has been a big contributor to our problems.
Attention deficit disorder on the ISIS. My next word, refugees.
Victims. We keep forgetting now in this current turmoil, they are fleeing ISIS. I mean, they are fleeing terrible, disastrous acts of war and horror. And the fact that we are now in the middle of this current Paris situation must not allow us to forget that these people are fleeing this kind of violence themselves. And the whole notion that this is just economic migrants, this is just people, who are trying to get away from things that it's easy for them to tolerate, is really, really unfair, because many of them have come from such privation. We cannot forget that they are victims.
But the pressure is going to come from the right of centre parties in all of these countries, saying that terrorists could come embedded in this sort of wave of refugees that's knocking down the doors of Europe and Canada and the United States.
That is certainly true, but at the same time, most of those guys who were, who did the Paris attack, I mean, they were collaborating with people who are homegrown, who are actually French citizens. Yeah. So it's not true to say that it's all coming with refugees. It isn't. I think the bigger threat is from the homegrown.
Do you believe that kind of seeing the refugees as victims is a policy that will prevail, or do you believe that there will be now serious pressure in the West to alter the policy?
Well, sadly, I don't think it will prevail. I think that the overarching popularity is going to be to say enough of the refugees. I mean, certainly Paul Ryan, the new Republican speaker, has already come out and said we shouldn't even take the ones we've committed to take. So you're seeing it a very, very big turnaround. And I do actually fear for Angela Merkel, because she has so staked her whole position on her welcome of the refugees, this extraordinary act that she had, this humanitarian outreach. Alas, I mean, it's going to put her in tremendous political difficulty now, I think.
Yeah. Next word, Trump.
Cartoon.
Cartoon. Except that, look at his numbers.
I know, his numbers are amazing, but it is ridiculous that he's where he is, and it's really only about the vacuum of the Republican Party right now. What is interesting about Trump, though, is he has, in a sense, been useful, because he's sort of obliterated so many other people in the Republican Party at this point, that it's been a kind of like a truth serum for all of them, because when he turns around and says to Jeb Bush, who was supposed to be the entitled, enthroned next member of the Bush family to get to the presidency, he's low energy, he has nothing to say. He's right, actually. It was sort of the emperor's new clothes. So there are times when he calls it, and it's true. And people go, you know what, he's right. And because he can just gobble up all the oxygen on TV, I mean, hardly anybody's on television except Donald Trump. He's found a way to just...
But is he on TV all the time because he's outrageous?
Yes, because he's so unpredictable. People love his unpredictability. They have no idea what he's going to say next. I don't think he knows what he's going to say next.
But, you know, why is he, or how would you explain the phenomenon of why he's popular?
I think we live now completely in a reality show culture. I mean, he's just the male version of the Kardashians. You know, he's what people understand and know. I also think there's a great, you know, lack of favor now for established politicians. There's a real desire to embrace the unconventional, never done it before kind of politician, because there's a disgust with Congress, because it's gridlocked, because nothing gets done, because it's seen to be a completely hopeless institution. People want to turn to, they think, okay, here's Trump, can do, entrepreneur, he can fix it. He keeps saying...
But he's hardly anti-establishment or subaltern. I mean, he's a corporate establishment guy.
Yes, but he plays it as if he's Mr., you know, out from, you know, Mr. Bootstraps, you know, which is extraordinary, because of course he isn't.
Could he be president?
He could be the nominee. I don't think he can be president, but he could be the nominee.
So my next word, Hillary.
Pantsuit.
Come on, we can do better than that for Hillary.
Well, no, but okay, she's a purpose-built pantsuit. The woman is, I mean, look at her strength. I mean, you have to say, and this is what is so great about this election, actually, because as you see all the flaming out on the Republican side, all the antics and the clowns, Hillary just powers on. You know, she had a terrible summer.
Yeah.
She was rusty.
Yeah.
No doubt that she was rusty. The email scandal came out of left field, and she did not handle it well. She actually handled it like a complete amateur, as if she'd never been in politics before. She was stumbling around. I really believe she was out of practice, but she has now got her groove back. And she came into that the first debate in the fall, and she just aced it. And she was back to being Hillary, well-informed, seasoned, grasp of the issues. And then she sat there for 11 hours being grilled in the hearings about the Benghazi embassy.
Yeah.
11 hours. I mean, that is a long time. Not put a foot wrong, completely answered every question sanely, pragmatically, never lost her temper, and she just got her groove back. She was extraordinary. I also think that in this period of the Paris attacks, everyone is going to think, wait a minute, we don't want one of these clowns, these antic people, these crazy outsiders. This expresses our rage. It's like there's a kind of anger management issue going on right now with the sort of Republican Party.
Yeah.
But actually, when real things happen, people start to think, well, actually, I want someone who does know, you know, what the hell's going on in all of these parts of the world. Hillary
she
knows
seems like a solid pair of hands.
She seems like a solid pair of hands. She seems like a person who understands how to answer the call in the middle of the night.
And yet you wrote at one point that you didn't think she should run.
Well, I feel she could have had her post-presidency without the presidency. And all the candy now is the post-presidency. That's when you can actually do something in the world, when you're out of there. Because when you're in there, you're so gridlocked. But I was being facetious, actually, because I think it'd be a bad thing for the United States if she didn't run. In fact, if she didn't run now, the Democrats, there's no one else in the bench.
Who's a bigger brand today, Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton?
Well, no one has the magic of Bill. I mean, when he comes into the room, he can just, and he has to stay in the background now because he knows, everybody knows. If he comes in the room, everybody else
Is he
evaporates.
good at staying in the background?
Well, that's the fun part. That makes their presidency, it could be enormous fun because the big dog cannot be kept in his kennel. You know, in the end, he's going to come barking out of there somehow because he can't help himself. He's a superstar. He's a rock star.
Is Hillary's gender an advantage or a disadvantage?
I think it's been a disadvantage for her
Really?
in that, yes, I think that America would much rather, they elected an African American before they would elect a woman. And that was bitter for her because it was like she felt that was her time, that was her moment. I think it's very difficult for her, but I think now there is a sense, come on, we've never had a woman. This is insane. You know, and every young
And the rest of us in this part of the world just don't get it.
just don't get it, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that has built up. And I think there is an admiration just for her toughness. You know, the woman is tough.
Yeah. Next word, Modi.
Modi. Stadium.
You think of stadiums?
I think of stadiums. I think of Modi, and I immediately think roaring crowds, you know, a crazy rock star scene. I mean, he's a fascinating figure. I mean, I do think that when he took over, I kind of wondered whether he would become like, you know, the Prime Minister of Turkey, and who knows whether he will go in that direction, really. But he's, you know, I mean, the point about him is, you know, he is a kick-starter, I have to say that. And people have made people fascinated by India again. You know, he is a massive global star. So from the point of view of the outside world, for us looking in, it has made India very, very interesting to people outside. And when he came to the United States, people were lining up to meet him. He went to Silicon Valley and he was a rock star in Silicon Valley. So, that wouldn't have been true in the past.
And is that unusual to watch, to get a sort of a politician coming in from another country and getting these rousing crowds?
Absolutely. I mean, it's unheard of, actually. I mean, America is deeply uninterested in the rest of the world, really. I mean, it can hardly get itself up to sort of, be interested in anything outside its own town. But I mean, so Modi is really a phenomenon.
Next word, India.
India. Cauldron. Wonderful boiling cauldron of democracy. What I love about India is the mouthiness, of Indians. The crazy debate, the roiling discussion, the vibrant intellectual world of print and media and discussion, and it's so
voluble
and vivid, and I love that, as someone who loves debate and energy, and I love that about India, and I love the way Indians don't want to be pushed around by anybody. I mean, they suddenly go and vote in some crazy direction, and they're just asserting their pluralness, their democracy. It's like, we have a mind of our own. It's the most informed electorate, really.
What has surprised you most about India?
Oh, how many Indias there are. That's what surprised me. Just when I think I'm beginning to slightly get a handle on India, I realize that there's just every region is so wildly different, and there's so much to see, and I'm so burning to see all of it. I have a pile of books about it. I'm an obsessive reader about India. I was hearing last night about a biography of Mayawati. I really want to read about Mayawati now. There's so much that I don't know and want to know.
Next word, equality.
Elusive.
Still elusive?
Still elusive. And certainly between the sexes, just when you think it's all happening and working, there's a constant need to be vigilant and a constant need to push back all the time on encroachments into a desire to push certainly women down again. We've seen a very bad couple of years, really, where women have been pushed back into regression just when you think they're making strides. And I fear for women like the women in Afghanistan, because they've made their gains in 10 years, and are they going to be pushed right back when the Americans finally leave in 2017? And even in the United States, we have seen a really big conservative push to end their rights to family planning and so forth, and it's just remarkable. You realize freedoms are never won, they have to be constantly fought for.
And one of the points you're making is that the gender conversation is a global one, right? It's not the West looking in at India telling us how we should be equal.
Not at all. I think the global conversation is the one that we like to have at Women in the World. That's why we do it, because we feel there's so much to learn from each other's cultures. I mean, for instance, raising families, is such a problematic issue in the West because we don't have the family structures in Southeast Asia. So that is a place where I think Indian women are much blessed, actually, because they do have that support system, most of them, that we don't have, for instance, in the West.
I think this conversation is a very much a work in progress. My next word, beauty.
Beauty. Changing, ever changing. The great thing about now is that I think there is beginning to be a kind of a repudiation of the old, certain kinds of stereotyping looks, the beauty queen kind of looks. You're seeing all kinds of different women being celebrated now. For instance, casting agencies and model agencies are understanding they want to see women, with strange noses and freckles and hair and they can still be considered,
flesh too.
And some flesh too. And they can, not that much flesh.
Even
unfortunately,
now,
flesh is always still an illusion. We like to think that. But there is a feeling, I think, that there's a new beauty platform, in a sense, starting, in which women can start to feel beautiful when they're not conventional.
Last word, Tina. How do you see yourself?
Watch out.
Watch out. Yeah. How do you see yourself?
A work in progress, a constant, ferment of recreations. I've had many careers and many different creative enterprises.
What makes you tick?
Well, I'm a bad steward. I love the act of reinvention and the new, the challenge. Of creating something from scratch. I'm not great at sort of, once it's done, sticking around and sort of, which is a fault, actually. I mean, it's a good idea.
You like your adrenaline fix, basically.
Yeah, I love it.
Hope you have a great stay in India.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you.
Thank you.